Nancy Guthrie has a pacemaker, and that pacemaker sends data to her medical team automatically, recording her heart activity in real time, every spike, every change, every moment her heart responded to what was happening around her. All of it time-stamped, all of it logged. And investigators believe that transmission may contain the most precise record of what happened to Nancy on the night of February 1st that exists anywhere in this entire case. That device is not just a medical tool in this investigation, it is a witness, one that cannot lie, cannot be pressured, cannot change its story, and whatever it recorded in those final minutes before its signal changed is sitting inside a sealed investigation that the public has never been allowed to see. Now here is what I need you to understand about where this case actually stands right now. Investigators are protecting 3 specific pieces of evidence with a consistency and deliberateness that tells its own story. The first 911 call made the morning Nancy was found missing, the full doorbell footage from her property, and the DNA recovered from the scene. 5 months in, and not one of those 3 things has been released to the public, not explained, not addressed, just protected, quietly, month after month. And here is the question I want you to sit with before we go any further. Investigators do not protect evidence this carefully when a case is going nowhere. They protect it when they believe it can stand in front of a jury, when they believe releasing it too soon could destroy the very outcome Nancy's family has been waiting for since February. So what do those 3 sealed pieces actually contain? And what does the pacemaker data tell us about the window of time investigators have already built this case around? Okay, so let me start with the timeline, because understanding the precise window investigators are working from changes how you read every other piece of evidence in this case. According to reporting on the case, Nancy's last known activity gets pinned down first. The last text, the last call, the last confirmed sign that she was awake and safe inside her own home. Then a gap appears. Security cameras meant to record her property show an interruption. A break in coverage that should not exist on a normal quiet night in the Catalina foothills. A break that appears at the exact moment Nancy disappears. Now I want you to think carefully about what causes a camera system to fail. A power outage, a Wi-Fi disruption, or something far more deliberate. Someone who knew the cameras were there and knew exactly when to disable them. A gap appearing at the precise moment Nancy vanishes is not a coincidence that investigators take lightly. It is one of the most significant details in the entire case, and it is one of the 3 things they have never explained publicly. But here is what the camera gap did not stop. Motion sensors built into her home security system continued functioning independently of the cameras. They do not need a clear picture to register movement, only a change in the space they monitor. Every door that opened, every person moving through a hallway, every footstep crossing a room during the minutes the cameras went dark, all of it potentially captured by sensors that kept running when the visual record stopped. And then there is the pacemaker. According to investigators familiar with the case, Nancy's pacemaker was transmitting data in real time on the night she disappeared. That transmission gives investigators something almost no other case ever has, a medical signal placing her condition at a near exact moment in time. If her heart rate spiked suddenly, that spike is recorded. If the transmission stopped entirely at a specific point, that stopping point is recorded too. Think about what that means for the investigation. The camera gap, the motion sensor activations, and the pacemaker transmission all converge on the same narrow window of minutes. Not hours, minutes. A small, specific stretch of time when everything that happened to Nancy Guthrie actually happened. Investigators are not sorting through hours of mystery. They have a precise window, and every suspect, every alibi, every phone record, every account of where a person claims to have been that night gets measured against those same few minutes. That window is the most valuable piece of real estate in this entire case. And investigators have never told the public exactly what it contains. Now, according to sources familiar with the investigation, the first 911 call made that morning sits sealed inside the case file. This is not a later call, not a follow-up. The first call, made the moment the family walked into that house and found blood on the floor, a phone on the counter, medication untouched, and Nancy gone. Here is why that specific call matters more than anything said publicly since. That call was made before police arrived, before media picked up the case, before lawyers spoke to anyone, before public pressure built and theories spread. Whatever was said in those first seconds came from people who had just walked into something terrifying with no time to think about how their words might sound, to investigators, to reporters, or to a future jury. A 911 call made in raw panic captures something later statements almost never have: a name mentioned in passing, a suspicion voiced before anyone said not to voice it, a detail about the scene described exactly as it appeared before memory had time to settle or shift. If a family member mentioned a specific person during that call, even casually, even as a question rather than an accusation, investigators would have every reason to seal that call until they finish building their case around that person. That is not hiding something pointless. That is protecting the foundation of a future prosecution. Okay, so let me talk about the doorbell footage, because this is the piece of sealed evidence that most people following this case have discussed the least, and it may be the most damaging piece of evidence against whoever eventually gets charged. Investigators have never released the full footage from Nancy's property. What the public has seen is a single frame, a masked figure on her porch, a gloved hand reaching toward the camera, foliage being pulled from a potted plant to cover the lens. That image has been broadcast across every screen in America for 5 months, but that single frame is not the full footage. And the gap between what has been released and what investigators are sitting on is where this case gets significantly more serious. Here is what a doorbell camera actually captures that most people do not think about. It does not just record the moment someone stands directly in front of it. It records everyone who comes near the property: delivery drivers, neighbors, anyone walking up the path toward the front door, anyone who lingers near the windows, anyone who looks directly at the camera or deliberately avoids it, anyone who comes back more than once. And that last detail is the one investigators are protecting most carefully. Think about what repeated visits on a doorbell camera actually mean in a criminal case. A single appearance on the night Nancy disappeared could suggest opportunity, someone who happened to be there at the wrong moment. Someone acting impulsively without prior planning, but multiple appearances across days or weeks before February 1st tells a completely different story. That is surveillance. That is a target being observed, studied, and eventually acted upon when the moment felt right. That is premeditation. And premeditation changes everything about the charges a prosecutor can bring, the sentence a court can hand down, and the entire narrative built in front of a jury. According to investigators familiar with the case, the full doorbell footage has never been released because it contains something worth protecting. Investigators do not sit on footage this carefully when it shows nothing useful. They protect it when it shows something that could be destroyed, challenged, or used by a defense team to build doubt if released too early. Now ask yourself this directly. If that footage showed only one visit on the night of February 1st, would investigators have any reason to seal it beyond that single frame already released? Probably not. The fact that the full footage remains locked away 5 months later suggests it shows more than one visit, more than one moment, possibly more than one person, and whatever it shows is considered strong enough to anchor a future prosecution if handled correctly. This connects directly to something Dr. Gary Bricado told Brian Enton that has not received nearly enough attention. He still believes, after 5 months of new developments and competing theories, that whoever planned this had genuine, intimate knowledge of Nancy's property, not a stranger who got lucky on a single attempt. The kind of familiarity that builds over time, through repeated presence, through watching, through learning exactly where the cameras were positioned and exactly how to approach the house in a way that minimized what those cameras would capture. The figure on that doorbell footage tried to remove the camera before covering it with foliage. That is not the behavior of someone who noticed a camera for the first time that night. That is the behavior of someone who already knew it was there and came prepared with a plan for dealing with it. Now here is where the third piece of sealed evidence enters the picture, and this is the one that investigators are being most careful about publicly: the DNA recovered from the scene. According to investigators familiar with the case, genetic genealogy work is actively being conducted on a DNA profile recovered from inside Nancy's home. This method has cracked cold cases that sat unsolved for 30, 40, even 50 years. Its use here signals two things simultaneously. Investigators have viable biological material from the scene, and that material has not produced a direct match in the CODIS database, meaning whoever left it behind has no prior criminal record connecting them to the national system of convicted offenders. Now I want you to understand what a CODIS miss actually means in this context, because most coverage treats it as a dead end. It is not. A CODIS miss simply means the person has not previously been convicted of an offense that required their DNA to be collected and stored. It does not mean they are unknown. It does not mean the DNA is useless. It means investigators have to work harder and smarter to get from a biological sample to a name. Genetic genealogy does exactly that. Instead of looking for an exact match to someone already in a criminal database, it searches for partial matches. Distant relatives. Anyone whose DNA overlaps enough with the unknown sample to begin building a family tree. From there, trained genealogists work branch by branch, narrowing an enormous pool of possible relatives down to a single living person. This is the same technique that identified Rex Heuermann as the Long Island serial killer after decades of failed investigation. The same technique that identified the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years. It does not fail when the biological material is viable and the investigators are patient. But here is the question nobody has been able to answer publicly. Why has the DNA not yet produced a named answer after 5 months? There are 3 possibilities, and each one tells you something different about where the investigation actually stands. The profile may be incomplete. Missing pieces that make a clean genealogy match difficult but not impossible with continued work. The sample may be mixed, containing DNA from more than one person, making it significantly harder to separate individual profiles cleanly enough to identify each contributor. A mixed sample is one of the hardest challenges in forensic science and can require months of careful lab work to untangle, or investigators may already have a completed match. A name sitting inside the investigation connected to both the DNA and the doorbell footage and possibly mentioned in that first sealed 911 call. Waiting not because the science is incomplete, but because the legal case around that name is still being built carefully enough to survive a trial. That third possibility is the one that changes everything about how you read the continued silence from the sheriff's office and the FBI. Because silence in an active investigation with viable DNA, sealed footage, and a sealed 911 call does not mean nothing is happening. It means something is happening that investigators are not ready to hand to a defense attorney yet. And that distinction matters enormously for what comes next in this case. Okay, so let me bring all 3 sealed pieces together, because individually each one is significant. But when you stack them on top of each other and line them up against the same narrow window of time investigators have already built from the camera gap, the motion sensors, and the pacemaker transmission, the picture that emerges is not a confused investigation going nowhere. It is a deliberate, layered case being built toward one specific outcome. Here is what investigators actually have. A precise window of minutes on the night of February 1st, established by 3 independent sources simultaneously. The camera interruption that began at a specific point. The motion sensor activations that continued running after the cameras went dark. And a pacemaker transmission that recorded Nancy's heart activity in real time until it changed. 3 completely independent systems, all pointing at the same narrow stretch of time, all confirming that something happened in that house during those specific minutes. That kind of convergence is rare in any investigation. Most cases rely heavily on one category of evidence, a confession, a single witness, one piece of physical proof. This case has 3 independent forms of evidence, each capable of standing alone in court, all pointing toward the same window. Now lay the 3 sealed pieces on top of that window and ask yourself what investigators are actually sitting on. The first 911 call captures the raw, unfiltered reaction of people who walked into that scene before anyone told them what to think, before lawyers spoke to anyone, before public pressure shaped any statement. If a name was mentioned in that call, even in passing, even as a question rather than an accusation, it was spoken at the most honest moment this case will ever produce, and it is sitting sealed inside an investigation that is being built carefully enough to survive a trial. The full doorbell footage shows everyone who came near that property, not just on the night of February 1st, but across the days and weeks before it. If the same figure appears more than once, that footage becomes evidence of premeditation, not just presence. And premeditation is the difference between a crime of opportunity and a planned, targeted abduction of a specific person in her specific home. Investigators protecting that footage this carefully for 5 months are not protecting nothing. They are protecting something a defense attorney would spend months trying to dismantle if it were released today. The DNA recovered from the scene has no match in CODIS. But genetic genealogy does not need CODIS. It needs time, viable material, and trained genealogists working branch by branch through family trees until a living person emerges at the end of the narrowing path. The same technique identified the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years. 5 months is not a long time for this kind of work when it is being done correctly. Now here is what I want you to understand about the silence from investigators that has frustrated everyone following this case since February. Investigators do not protect 3 completely different categories of evidence simultaneously: a human record, a visual record, and a biological record, when a case is weak or confused or going nowhere. They protect evidence across 3 independent categories when they believe all 3 point toward the same person, and they are not ready to hand that person's defense attorney a roadmap yet. Think about what a defense attorney does with evidence released too early. They study every frame of footage for an angle that creates doubt. They challenge every DNA result for a procedural error that could get it thrown out. They listen to every word of a 911 call for an inconsistency that contradicts a later statement. Early release does not help a prosecution. It arms the defense. And investigators building a case they intend to win in a courtroom understand this better than anyone watching from outside. Now I want to address something directly, because there is a question this case keeps raising that deserves an honest answer rather than careful language designed to avoid it. The Dominic Evans thread. His name circulated in news reports and online discussions early in the investigation. Investigators did not call him a suspect. They did not clear him either. He has sat in that uncomfortable middle space for 5 months where the public watches and waits for investigators to say something definitive. A teacher, someone trusted with children every day, someone with a public reputation built over years, sitting under a cloud of suspicion that has neither been confirmed nor removed. That middle space is not accidental. Investigators do not leave a person of interest publicly unnamed and uncleared unless they have a specific reason to keep that space open. Either they are still building towards something connected to that person, or they are using the ambiguity to monitor behavior and communication while the case develops behind closed doors. Neither of those explanations is comfortable. Both of them are consistent with how a serious investigation actually operates. Dr. Bricato's assessment connects directly here. He believes the person who planned this had intimate knowledge of Nancy's property built over time. He believes the figure on the doorbell footage is likely a hired hand, someone brought in to create the impression of an outside stranger, while the actual planning and motive sit with someone closer to Nancy. Someone more familiar with her life and her home, someone who may have crossed paths with local law enforcement before in some capacity. If that theory is accurate, the 3 sealed pieces of evidence take on a different weight. The 911 call may contain a name spoken in panic that connects to someone close to the family. The doorbell footage may show repeated visits from someone familiar with the property rather than a stranger doing surveillance for the first time. And the DNA may be in the process of being traced through genealogy work toward a family tree that connects to someone already known to investigators. None of that is confirmed. All of it is consistent with what investigators have and have not said publicly across 5 months of deliberate silence. And here is what Dr. Bricato said that I want to leave you with. What breaks a case like this is not DNA alone, not digital forensics alone, not sealed footage or sealed phone calls alone. It is people. If more than one person was involved in what happened to Nancy Guthrie, and the evidence increasingly points in that direction, someone is carrying something they were never built to carry indefinitely. The accumulated pressure of 5 months of silence, of watching the investigation grow more serious by the week, of knowing that genetic genealogy is narrowing toward a name, and that a 911 call sits sealed in a file with words spoken in panic that cannot be taken back. That pressure becomes its own investigative force. People crack, not always out of conscience, sometimes simply because the weight becomes unbearable, and silence stops feeling like safety. The pacemaker is still transmitting its data to investigators. The genealogy work is still running branch by branch. The doorbell footage is still sealed. The 911 call is still sealed. And 3 completely independent forms of evidence are all pointing at the same narrow window of minutes on the night of February 1st, waiting for the moment investigators decide the case is ready. Nancy Guthrie went to Mass every Sunday morning. She called her daughter every day without missing a beat. She was reported missing because she did not show up to a church live stream with the friends who loved her. She deserves to come home. Stay with this case. Something is moving. I will talk to you very soon.